warranty claims at Travelers. We have Kathleen Parker, who is a specialist compensation at Definity. Alyson Paisley, Vice President, Sales and Service, Direct Distribution at Intact Insurance. And we also have Ryan Arbuckle, Account Executive at Western Financial Group, who's repping the West Coast for us. We had to make sure we had someone from out West in addition to Lindsay, so that's great. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Before we get started with the event, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all of the lands that we are on today. While we are hosting this event on a virtual platform, let's take a moment to acknowledge the stewards and importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in our relationships with and to fostering our own understanding of Indigenous peoples and their culture. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land on Turtle Island home. And let's just take a moment to reflect and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and can each in our own way able to move forward in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So we'll get started now. I think this is a really great topic. When we were doing some research beforehand, it would seem that the global and national statistics for people with disabilities in the workforce is about 15%. And the insurance industry from the Institute's demographic research in 2018 is about 2%. So there are still some barriers such as physical structures or accommodations from neurodivergent people. So really interesting perspectives for us to hear today. We have a wide variety of people from the industry. Really great to see such a good turnout. So I know I'm really excited for the conversation. And Lindsay, I know you're also pretty excited for this conversation.
Yes, I am. It's so great to be here. Thanks everyone for coming out. And I think this is such an important topic. Not only is it National Disability Employment Awareness Month, if you weren't aware, but as Carolyn mentioned, we've got some pretty interesting numbers as an industry, and I thought it would be good to start this conversation with a bit of context as for why that might be the case. So if we're looking at, a benchmark nationally and globally of 15%, and then self-reported disclosure of disability within our industry at 2%, why is that? And there's a lot of reasons it could be. We're speculating here, of course, but from my experience, there's lots of people who don't feel comfortable to disclose their disability, whether that be concern about stigma or impacts to their career progression. There's also people who have disabilities based on the definition of what disability includes, but they might not consider their condition to be a disability. And so we might see underreporting of disability for that reason as well. And when talking about disability, I think it's a great place to level set of what is disability, what does that mean? And there's many different types of disability. So both visible and non-visible or non-apparent disabilities exist. Sometimes people have dynamic disabilities, which means they might use an aid or assistive device or technology, but other times they don't. Some of the types of disability that might not be visible could be mental health conditions, including anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, types of neurodivergence like autism, dyslexia, ADHD, or other cognitive impairments like dementia, traumatic brain injury, or different learning disabilities. There's also visual impairment or restricted vision, hearing loss, sensory and processing difficulty, and then various health conditions, including diabetes, chronic illnesses, autoimmune disease, chronic pain and fatigue, and respiratory conditions. So there's a lot of disabilities that might exist outside of what we would typically associate with disability. And I know that when I was a kid, I just assumed if I saw someone who was a wheelchair user, okay, that person has a disability. But other than that, walking around in the world, I didn't know if someone had a disability or not. And I think we can likely chalk that up to representation in media, which we'll talk about later. And just, what we're exposed to. But we wanted to sort of level set the conversation with, this statement that disability is very broad and there's a lot of things that fit within it. And we've got a great group of panelists here today to talk about their own personal experience with disability. And something that we kind of chatted about as a group beforehand as well is that disability is one of the few types of marginalization, you could say, that can affect you at any point in your life. So you could be born with a disability, or at any point in your life you could become disabled. And we actually see a lot of people develop disabilities later in life, especially as they become elderly. So something to keep in mind is that anyone on this call today could have a disability or become disabled at some point. And I think it's a really good perspective of just why disability inclusion is so important. So with that, I think let's turn to our panelists and hear from them. Alyson, why don't you start us off and tell us about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Lindsay. So I'm Alyson Paisley. As mentioned earlier, I work with Intact Financial Corporation. So I've been in the industry for about 15 years now. Most of my career has been on the Intact insurance side. And recently I joined Bel Air Direct, which is under the Intact Financial umbrella. So I am living in London, Ontario with my partner, and we have 3 young kids. So I've got 2 boys aged 10 and 12 and 1 daughter who's about to turn 6. So busy household right now. And the reason I'm participating on this panel today is to share a bit my experience working with a disability. So I am legally blind. And the reason there's a bit of a distinction between blind and legally blind, for those who may not know, is that I do have some vision, but it's below a certain threshold, which affords me some benefits, but also means I'm unable to perform certain tasks. So for example, driving. So I'm really looking forward to being part of the discussion today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alyson. Great intro. Kathleen, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Great, thanks, Lindsay. So yeah, I'm Kathleen Parker, and I've worked with Definity for 14 years now. So it was my first real career job, and I work in human resources. So I have a little bit of a different perspective. I've worked a little bit with some of the accommodations and things like that, helping employees to sort of navigate through the workplace as well. I myself was born a right arm above elbow amputee, so a very apparent disability right from the time I was young. So I'm really excited today to speak about that and share my perspectives.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Renee, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Lindsay. I am Renee Clark. I am an AVP at Travelers Insurance. I am an AVP for property claims. So my team is busily working on those Fiona claims, doing an amazing job. But I also look after new home warranty for Alberta and British Columbia. I have been at Travelers 23 years, and I have been in the industry 35 years, and probably a lot longer than some people have even been born. I have 2 amazing daughters who are beautiful inside and out. They are 28 and 26. My husband and I live on the east side of Toronto. We have 4 dogs, so we are empty nesters, but we have filled those with dogs. I have a disability that I have attained later in life. I have otosclerosis, so I have an ear condition that I am losing my hearing. So it's the forming of the ears, the bones in my ear. So I am losing my hearing. They had originally told me that I was a surgeon, I would receive surgery and that I would be able to hear eventually. And now they have told me that I'm not a surgical candidate, so I will eventually lose my hearing. They won't tell me how long it'll take. So I do wear a hearing aid in one ear, and eventually I will have to wear a hearing aid in another ear. So I don't know if it'll be 5 years, 10 years, how long I'll lose my hearing, but it is something that I am dealing with later in life. And but I will get through it. And that's all that I have. And I'll pass it back to you, Lindsay.
Thanks so much, Renee. And I'm really looking forward to talking about your experience a little bit later in our conversation here. And Ryan, last but not least, I'm going alphabetically if anyone figured that out.
That's okay. Thank you, Lindsay. So my name is Ryan Arbuckle. I'm an account executive with Western Financial Group and Western Coast Insurance. I live in Shawnigan Lake, BC. I am not right on the lake. Everyone always asks that, but I'm about 2 minutes away. My wife and I have been together for 15 years, married for going on 12. I've been in the industry for going on 16. My wife is also in the industry. She's actually a commercial underwriter. And before that, she spent 10 years in claims. We've got 3 dogs, so if you hear any of them barking in the background once in a while, I do work from home remotely, so it might happen. That being said, I'm here because I really want people to broaden their horizons and educate more people. I think education is key when it comes to any sort of disability, and speak up, because everybody honestly judges everybody else. It doesn't matter if it's their clothing, if it's the way that they look, if it's the way that they speak, it doesn't matter. So I believe in being true to yourself and owning who you are, because if you own who you are, you're going to be perfectly fine in life.
Thanks so much, Ryan. I know you'll have some great nuggets of wisdom to share a little bit later as we talk about some of your experiences as well. And I guess I'll just cap things off by sharing why I'm here. I've been involved with the Career Connections team at the Insurance Institute for a little bit over a year now and planning some of these panels. And they kindly asked me to co-host this one, not only because of my role in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also because of my own experience having a neurodevelopmental disorder called ADHD, which is something I have had my entire life, but was only diagnosed with in adulthood. So that's been interesting to experience. And I think this will be a really interesting conversation with all of the folks that we have here. So with that, I think I'll pass it back over to Carolyn to get us kicked off with our first kind of question.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. We're very lucky to have you as a co-host. And I know when we were preparing for this discussion, I was doing a lot of research, and Lindsay was very, very helpful with that, providing me lots of resources. And something that we came across that I found quite interesting was that, a lot of times labels are sort of put on this community with no choice. And now we're seeing that there's more discussion, more openness. And so people have a choice and can advocate more for how they would like their disabilities to be described and sort of how they would like to present themselves. So within that, Lindsay was sharing with me that some people will prefer person first language and others prefer disability first language. So an example of this would be saying that you are a disabled person, or saying a person with a disability. And, that might be saying I'm a person with autism, or saying I'm an autistic person. So if you're not sure and you're chatting with someone, you can sort of listen to the conversation and kind of see what they would refer. And that's what you should try to use for them as well. So just out of curiosity, let's see, does anyone on the panel have a preference? So maybe we'll start with you, Ryan, and sort of work our way backwards.
So as you noticed, I might have missed in my intro that I do have cerebral palsy. I'm a hemiplegic left side, which means my disability is my whole left side, and I have a cyst on the whole right side of my brain. So the right side of my brain doesn't actually function at all. That being said, it doesn't affect me that much, especially brain matter. However, I don't really identify as having a disability. I have an ailment like everyone else. So that's why I missed it in my intro. I don't even think about it. It's just part of life. And I go on. So I do apologize for that, but that is one of those things. I don't let it affect me, and none of my friends or family do either. So I'm thankful for that.
That's great. Thank you, Ryan. So Renee, do you have any preference on sort of how you would describe your hearing loss?
No, and it's a really good question, because it's ironic, and what I'm going to probably talk a bit more about it, but I'm in some ASL classes here at Travelers, and there is various degrees of people with deafness in this class, and they all don't agree on how they want to be called. Yeah. There's hearing impaired and deaf, and they all have different, there are some people completely deaf, and there's people who are, you know, like myself, one ear, that type of stuff, and they all have different ways that they want to be called. So even in the deaf community, it varies. So
Yeah.
it depends on the person, and like you said, just ask them what they
That's
want.
great. And that's what's so good about the panel is a lot of times people maybe are curious or they want to, you know, make sure that they're sort of using proper etiquette and they're not sure what to do. Kathleen, did you have any comments?
Yeah, so I typically describe myself as an army amputee just because of the way it rolls off the tongue, and you know, from a really young age, that's how I was quote unquote labeled. So I really appreciate this discussion though, because it is allowing me to sort of take a look at the labels that are sort of thrusted upon people through societal norms. So I think that it's worth taking the time to sort of pause and maybe unpack those a little bit. And who knows, maybe I will change how I describe myself in the future.
Thanks, Kathleen. And Alyson, how about you?
Yeah, I like the way you put that, Kathleen, because when I saw that question, I had to pause and really think about it, because I've always just said I'm legally blind. Like, it's just part of who I am, and I've never really thought much about it, but I don't think I assigned that to myself. So I think that that's something that might have to evolve in my own thinking too. But at this stage, I'm comfortable saying I'm legally blind because I haven't really, it's just part of who I am. I haven't really seen it separately as a disability, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you, Alyson. So Lindsay was also very helpful in preparations, and she was telling me about the social model of disability. And Lindsay, I would love for you to share that with the group today. If you can explain that a little bit to us, I think it'd be very helpful.
Sure thing. And I think Kathleen really set this up well by talking about the way that labels are thrust upon us by society. And similarly, disability really exists that way as well. Our understanding of disability and what we've grown up with and how we've seen ourselves represented is really what informs the language we use when we talk about disability. And to understand that, we have to understand, where did this notion or concept of disability even come from? So historically, the common model that most people would be familiar with when it comes to disability is the medical model of disability. And generally speaking, if there's any medical professionals here, don't get mad at me, the medical model of disability is based on the assumption that disability is a problem that can or should be fixed with medical intervention. It basically is to say, like, disability means there's something wrong with you or you're broken, and then medicine or treatments or, you know, whatever will fix that problem. In contrast to that, the social model of disability says that we are all unique and we all have different abilities and different limitations. And society is only built to accommodate some of us. Which means that it's society that disables us or enables us based on our limitations. And society is built sort of for one type of person. We could get into a lot of other dynamics outside of disability, but in this context, it would be, you know, able-bodied, neurotypical people is who society is built for. And anyone who doesn't fit into that sort of is left to figure out how they navigate this world. So in the social model of disability, in short, it's the society and broader social structures that are what enable or disable us. And that's a big contributor to the language that we use, especially when it comes to person-first language versus identity-first language. And as you mentioned, Carolyn, there's groups that prefer one versus the other. And I think what I would love people to take away from this is that disability is not a bad word. And if we treat it like it is, then we just will perpetuate the stigma that's around it. So for myself, when I'm speaking generally, I will use person with a disability and disabled person interchangeably. But, you know, rule of thumb, as you said, is to honor the preference of the person you're speaking to if you're speaking to a specific person or group. So if you're on the call today and you have a personal preference, please know, I mean no offense, when I say disabled or person with a disability, I'm speaking generally. And when we are having our one-on-one conversations, then we can get to know everyone's personal preferences a little bit more. So with that being said, now that we all have this kind of level playing field, would love to hear from each of you how your disability has impacted your career and your work experience. So maybe we'll start this time somewhere in the middle and we'll go with Kathleen.
I was trying to summarize this, and to be really honest, I don't think my disability has had a profound impact on my career experiences. And that's just simply because I was able to be accommodated fairly easily. So I'll talk a little bit more about accommodations later, but yeah, I'm going to keep it short and simple and just say that I'm very lucky to be supported by my employer, like through and through, and also by my family. So I think that's really important. And when you're able to feel supported, your ability to grow personally and professionally is all that much more, nourished, and you're just able to do that more easily.
One question, if I could ask, this is not script, so apologies. Do you think that your disability impacted like the career path that you chose since you've had it, since you were a kid?
To be really honest, no, I actually don't think it did. I wanted to be so supported by like an organization that could provide benefits, pension, a good work-life balance, like all of those things that I was looking for. The fact that I ended up in an office job, like for me, it was because it was a local employer, they had a great reputation, like all of those things all sort of fit the bill for me. Had I wanted to go be a firefighter or a police officer or somebody who picks up the recycling, I still think I would have done that if that was part of my passion, because I would have just, I figured it out or advocated for myself through the process. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Renee, let's flip over to you. How do you feel like your disability has impacted your career and work experience? And I think you've kind of hinted at that already in some of what you shared.
Yeah, and because it was later in my career, so there wasn't really an impact. If there's anything, it was because I felt self-conscious because all of a sudden I'm wearing a hearing aid, and maybe it had been a little while before I was actually diagnosed. Now I could hear meetings. Now I could hear, it was like crowds, and I wasn't maybe picking up on things, and now I have a device, and again, very similar. I felt very supported by a company, and again, accommodations, that type of stuff. I was like, oh, I can hear now and that type of stuff. But more or less it was my own self-consciousness and feeling, okay, now everybody sees I wear a hearing aid, but that was it was my own doing. But up until then I hadn't been affected by my career or anything like that.
Great. We'll flip over to Ryan, and Ryan, I'm curious for your answer because I think you might have already sort of told us.
Yeah, honestly, it's never affected me. My friends, my family, everybody else. As I was growing up, there was no such word as can't in my household. It's let's try it, let's see what we can do. And so I've looked at life like that my entire 37 years I've been alive. It is one of those things where if I want to do it, I'm going to try it and let's go for it. I fell into this job, honestly, like most people do in insurance. So I love it. And like Kathleen said, if I wanted to do something else, I would have gone for that as well. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Fantastic. Alyson, we'll wrap this question with you.
Sure. So I want to share like one positive piece and then one piece that maybe has been a bit more challenging. So positive, sometimes I feel like with having poor vision, I rely on other senses. And for me, I have like a super memory. It's my superpower at work because like a presentation, I have to memorize it before I present because I can't read notes in a meeting. Or even growing up, like learning the piano, I had to memorize sheet music before I could sit and play it because I couldn't see it from where I sat. So that's kind of been, I would say, something that's actually helped advance my career because I was always seen as like a go-to resource because I knew where to find the resource just from my memory. So I always kind of appreciated that about that aspect of my vision. But I would say a challenge, if I'm being fully transparent, it's a bit of self-inflicted insecurity, I suppose. and the thing with low vision is sometimes people make assumptions that I can just fix it with glasses. So, you know, you see me hunched over at a desk, or I'm in a meeting and I have to get up and actually walk to the front of the room to read something on the screen, or I don't see people in the hallway because I can't recognize their face. It's the comment of like, just get glasses. And it sounds silly, but I feel judged in those circumstances. And sometimes I think that led me to having a bit of insecurity and maybe self-doubt in what I was capable of. So I would say that's the piece that's maybe I've struggled a little bit with in my career, but I've been very fortunate to have mentors and leaders that have helped me overcome that.
I really appreciate the duality in what you just shared. The strengths that you've been able to hone because of your disability, but then also some of the challenges that have come. And I think that those external judgments that we've sort of discussed a little bit, and some of the stigma there. And I think that's a great transition into our next question. And Renee, I would love to hear from you, and then Alyson, if you want to add anything to this, you are more than welcome to. But what would be your advice or encouragement to someone who's concerned about how disclosing their disability might stigmatize them or impact their career?
I think, you know, how would it would impact their career progression. I would, you know, I would definitely check your employers, like, to see if it lists diversity on their, you know, I was thinking about this a lot, is check to see if your employer lists the disability on their diversity statement. Do they clearly highlight that disability? They have an affinity on their networks? Do they have mentor programs? Do they mention accommodations? You know, get to know their manager. So, you know, do they feel comfortable talking to their manager? So if they want to disclose it, like, how does their manager feel about that? Because most employees disclose it to their manager first, right? So you'd be comfortable talking to your manager. You know, if they're worrying about it, is your manager comfortable talking to your manager? Because if you don't feel comfortable talking to your manager, then, you know, maybe talk to a peer first and start talking to your peer about that. And in the event that still could be challenging, then see if your company has a formal allyship program, like start talking to them about that. And then just start talking to other people. If you're uncomfortable about disclosing it there, you know, get some advice there through an allyship program, like through a DN and that type of stuff. And then, you know, like at Travelers, we have a mental health first aider program too, and they could give you some advice there, that type of stuff. They could talk to peers, they can, you know, do some recommendations, but I would reach out to, you know, each company has some awesome mental or human resources, business partners, and talk to them if you're uncomfortable, if you're nervous about if that's going to stall your career progression or something. But definitely talk to your human resources first. But, you know, develop a relationship with your manager, that type of stuff, if you're concerned about, you know, career progression and stuff like that. But I think, you know, managers, you're going to develop a rapport, that type of stuff. I would feel horrible if someone that was reporting to me didn't feel comfortable disclosing or anything like that. But if they didn't, I would think talking to a HRG or your business partner in human resources would be a really good step too.
That's really great advice. And I think I liked your suggestion a lot about talking to a peer, like if you don't quite feel comfortable talking to, you know, a leader yet, because sometimes it's a little bit easier to open up to someone who's on your level, and that could just help start making you feel more comfortable with disclosing, and you get practice at it, and then you can have that conversation with your leader when you need to.
Yeah.
Alyson, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that? Because I know you shared about some of the mentors who had also helped you in terms of dealing with worry about stigma.
Yeah, and actually I'll have an opportunity to share an example of that shortly, but maybe just one thing out, because I'm like in no means an expert on any of this, but I can share like a little bit from my experience too is, yeah, I'm in situations that maybe create a little discomfort for me because I feel like people might be wondering why I'm acting a certain way, and I'm not gonna like shout from the rooftop, hey, everybody, here's my situation. That doesn't make me feel very comfortable. But, you know, I did recognize that one thing that makes me very uncomfortable at work is I'm constantly worried that people think I'm rude because I can't see them and I don't say hi. And so one of the things I changed in my practice is, you know, when I meet and when I'm working with a new team or I'm collaborating with a different group, I actually share that up front. Hey, if we see each other in the hallway, just so you know, if I don't say hi, it's because of this, and would love if you just say hi to me first and who you are. And like, I've been blown away by how many people remember that and are just super intentional about that around me. And that just kind of removes that sense of insecurity for me. So you kind of, I think, starting small too with the areas that are going to help you in your day to day.
That's also really great advice and a wonderful example. Thanks for sharing that. And while we're here, a follow-up question, just sort of switching gears a little bit. So we found ourselves, you know, in this remote work world, and it sounds like you maybe work in the office a fair bit, just from the sense of your last example there. But what are some of the ways that you think remote work has impacted accessibility? Has it improved because people are able to work from home and maybe they have better supports in their own environment, or have there been new challenges that have been presented when working in a digital environment?
I think it may depend for some on what their circumstances are, but I think we're all reading that many are finding that being remote is almost like an equalizer. You think about things like getting ready for a commute or getting ready for the day and the different complexities that could add for certain people living with different types of disabilities. And so being remote can remove that. For me personally, I find when I'm participating on a virtual meeting, I feel more included because I can zoom in, I can see people's reactions. If there's material being shared, I can zoom in. I noticed as soon as we went back to the office, I had barriers that maybe before I didn't realize were barriers until they had been removed in a remote environment. So I do think there's positives that way. The one thing I would say is with companies now having more and more hybrid workplaces, I think we have to challenge ourselves on whether we're being accessible enough in remote and in person, because like with our digital tools, are we accessible for all? Is there closed captioning? Is there speech to text? With people working at home, are they getting the same personal, like tailored support for their home office setup that they might have gotten when they were in office to make sure that they're preventing any injury? So I certainly think there's still work to do, but I do think that remote is allowing for some improved accessibility that way.
I think I'd largely agree with you. I've heard and read similarly about just the equalizer that remote work has been, but I think you give great examples of why it's still so important to keep accessibility top of mind and how quickly we can forget things and what might be barriers when we go back to kind of that previous environment that we were used to. So those are really excellent points. Renee, wondering if you have anything to add to that remote work and accessibility conversation.
Yeah, and as she was speaking, I was like the other senses, right? Because she mentioned caption control, you know, working from home, I've been definitely using caption control, but I have a little speaker that, you know, I'm alone at home. So that speaker is like cranked up. So I can do that at home. But when I go into the office, I can't do that in the office, right? It totally disturbs everybody. So, you know, remote working, that has been an advantage. But when I go into the office, I have a headset that I use when I go in there, but it's all day long, my hearing aid gets pressed in. So it's just the different things that you have to change when you go in versus remote. But yeah, caption control I use a lot, and this speaker is on high volume all day at home. The dogs don't mind.
Carolyn, I'll flip it over to you for this next speaker.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. So we're going to shift gears. That's a cycling joke, if anyone picked up on that, but we're going to ask Ryan, who is a national para champion. He's very involved in the cycling world. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more about that. I know when we were chatting before, it sounded like it had had a pretty big impact on you.
Yeah, it really did. Honestly, I've been riding my bike ever since I was 5 or 6 years old. However, I got into competitive cycling when I was about 11 or 12, and I was actually on the para-national team when I was 12 and a half. My first trip was roughly 13 years old, and I was going to Europe with the national team for a race. And one thing it really did for me was open up my eyes to how many people in the entire world have some sort of ailment. And I don't call it a disability. I call it an ailment because everybody has something, whether it's seen or not. Some of them there were blind, and they were riding tandems with an able-bodied pilot, which is the front person on the bike. And some of them were on trikes, some of them were in wheelchairs. And it really became apparent to me that everybody has something. So if we just own it on our own, we can grow as people and we can grow as a society. On top of that, I also found that a lot of people were talking about it and what they had, how it came to be, whether it was they were in the military and they had an injury from one of their tours that they could never be in the military again, or whether they were born with it. It was really interesting. So it helped me really understand that I don't have to be ashamed of it. And I was never really ashamed of it anyways, because my family wouldn't allow that. They were proud of it. And I honestly think it afforded me a lot of opportunities that I wouldn't have had if I was able-bodied. No way in hell would I have been able to probably be on the national cycling team if I was able-bodied. And there's no way I could have given back in the capacity that I am now, being a cycling team manager that I have been since I was 21 years old. We support 3 para-athletes within BC, a whole slew of masters athletes, and so on and so forth. And I also sit on many of the boards and consult for them around Canada, because these people have known me for years that are in the higher ups of that. So yeah, it is one of those things that definitely deeply affected how I look at life.
That's great. And I know you're telling me that the Paralympics haven't really been that around for that long. And we're also seeing different things, like Lindsay was telling me that she's watched some shows lately that have people with disabilities. So I think you said on Dancing with the Stars, there was a woman, an actress with MS, Survivor. Who was on Survivor? Remind me.
It was an amputee.
A leg amputee.
A leg amputee, yeah. So there's a show on Netflix. My ex-boyfriend, Prince Harry, has been hosting the Invictus Games. So we are definitely seeing it a lot more in different areas. And I wanted to ask you, Ryan, do you find that this sort of increased visibility and representation of people with disabilities in the media or sort of different areas of society is helping to kind of reduce some of that stigma that some people might think of, or that's associated with having a disability or an ailment?
I really do. And the main reason for that, and just touching point back on the Paralympics, the first time that they were actually ever televised was 2000, the Sydney Olympics. And since then, it has blown up. And you're seeing some of these athletes that are getting the same sponsorships as able-bodied athletes. And I can tell you that we probably work just as hard, if not harder, to achieve those goals with adaptations in some cases. However, yes, you are correct with the actual visibility of the Paralympics and other sports and all these shows. It is making people talk about it a lot more, and it's making people with any sort of ailment or disability or whatever you want to call it, be open about it and be forthcoming and not be ashamed of it. Because a lot of people prior to 1985 were stuffed in homes and forgotten about. And that's a real shame, because we can be valued members of society.
Yeah, I think that representation piece is just so important. And, I'm sure that you would all agree with that too. So we're going to pass it back to Lindsay now. Thank you, Ryan.
I'm just looking at our time here and thinking about maybe where we might want to skip. I think let's quickly talk about accommodations a little bit more. I know we've sort of touched on them, but I'm curious if Kathleen or maybe Renee, you want to share about your experience with requesting accommodations at work, and how you might encourage other people to do that. I know you both kind of shared previously some of the accommodations that you have, and I think Carolyn had put in the chat that most accommodations are actually pretty affordable, usually under $500.
Yeah, sure. I can share a little bit about that. So my my situation, I mean, this was my first real career role. So I kind of went to the interview, obviously disclosed my disability. I think I even disclosed it in my resume, I'm not sure. And didn't really talk too much about accommodations because up until that point, like through high school and university, I had just used a regular keyboard. I don't wear a prosthesis, so I just kind of sat awkwardly. You know, being in my early 20s, it wasn't so bad because I didn't have all of the back and neck problems that I do today, but it was fine. So it was actually my employer when I arrived in the first day that had suggested some keyboard options for me, and I hadn't researched it or done anything. So that's my first point is advocate for yourself, maybe do a little bit of research, you know, come prepared. Don't be like me. But I was really thankful that this person had gone ahead and done that for me, because I did end up purchasing through the company a split keyboard. So I don't know if you can see it here, but it's kind of in two pieces. So I just elevate one side, and actually somebody at the office also built me like a little box to put it on as well, which is handy. So I keep one at the office, and actually I think my husband built this one at home for me, but super simple, like under $150 for all of this. Really, really easy. So I guess that would be my first point, is to, you know, look at some options. You know, there's a company in Canada, they're called Bridges, and they're a really great company that has a lot of assistive technology. I've actually reached out to them a few times throughout my career because I've thought about other options as well for one-handed keyboards, and they actually have a program where you can trial some of their devices. So if you reach out to them, you can speak to somebody there, and they'll like allow you to trial things for about a month or so, and you can make the decision on what you want to purchase. So yeah.
Awesome advice. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for sharing that resource with everyone. And I love just that your employer did the research themselves to be prepared for when you joined, even though you hadn't asked for anything, you know, out front. They took it upon themselves. That's a great example of what, you know, everyone should be doing to create an inclusive and accessible work environment for people. Renee, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
I had similar experiences because, you know, as I was wearing my hearing aid, and then I think one of my managers came in one time and my hearing aid was on the table, and they're like, "What's going on?" I go, "Oh, I just have to take a break sometime. My headset, you know, as I was wearing it, it indented at the back of my head," and they were like, "You know, we can look at headsets that overcover your ears so you get a little break." And they were, and I was just prepared just to give myself a rest. Like I was just, they're like, "No, you do not have to deal with that. We will fix." And they were like researching Best Buy and doing, and I just felt like they actually care about my dented ear. Like I just felt like this isn't just me, right? Like I felt really good. And then I actually had our IT department go, "You know, we could turn on the Bluetooth on your laptop." And now my headset is connected directly to my headset. So I am taking this Zoom call through my ear. It freaks me out a little bit because sometimes it's a little loud, but I could take my calls and my cell phone calls through my Zoom, my Bluetooth earphone, my hearing aid. So it's just things that like that you feel, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not technically skilled, but other people have invested in helping me. So it's like we're in this together. So it's really nice. You know.
Yeah, Wonderful. Again, just another great example of just the support that your employer has provided. And like you said, you yourself wouldn't necessarily know the right solution or how some of these technologies can all work together. But when you're able to kind of disclose these things, and then, you know, people are supportive of you and coming together to create these solutions, that's when you really get that accessibility, and that's fantastic.
Yeah.
While we're chatting, I know that you've also led the Travelers Canada Disability and Allies network. So do you have any thoughts on how employers or colleagues can help with accessibility and inclusion in the workplace?
Yes, join a DN. Even if you don't have a disability, join as an ally. Here at Travelers, our disability DN, we have many support groups. So again, you don't have to have a disability, but you could be an ally. Just to name a few, some of our subgroups, we have Puzzle Pieces of Autism, we have MS support group, we have the deaf support group where we're actually learning ASL so that we can learn sign language to sign with our deaf co-workers. And I think that, you know, as much as I'm one of those deaf co-workers, I will need to know how to use sign language. But there was over 300 between Canada and the US that are learning sign language so that we could sign with our deaf co-workers. And I think that just shows how many people across our Travelers organization that want to learn so that we can communicate with each other. And it was just so powerful, that first class, of how many people want to learn. So I just think that was just amazing. I think another thing that a company can do is just look at all your job descriptions. Are they inviting for people with disabilities, right? Are they current? If it says team player, does that really mean that someone with a neurodivergent would look at that job description and go, yeah, that's the job for me, I have to be a team player? I mean, well, it doesn't need to be that. They're just, you know, that's something that they want to join the company. Another thing is coworkers. Be mindful in meetings. Like if you're setting up a meeting and it's off-site, is it wheelchair accessible? Like just know those type of things where you're setting, you know, is accessible for everybody to join, that type of stuff. If you're setting up a meeting and if someone wants caption control and they've asked for it in the Zoom or Teams, acknowledge it, allow it to happen. Don't ignore that, right? Just make sure everybody can join and everybody's partaking in the meeting. Just little things like that, that everybody can partake. Everybody is included.
These are so many great, really, really good advice and lots of suggestions that I think people can take proactively. You know, you don't have to wait for someone to ask about closed captioning or accessibility. You can, you know, make sure that your meeting spaces are accessible, identify the ones that aren't, and maybe don't use those ones for your meetings or kind of larger events. Things like just sharing in advance that there will be closed captioning and how to use that and turn it on if people aren't familiar with the platform. There's a lot of things that people can do proactively, and you've given so many great suggestions here. Alyson, I'm wondering if you have anything that you wanted to add to that about how employers can be supportive or how allies can offer support just in creating that accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities.
I love the stories of how supportive employers have been, and personally I've had that experience as well, and that to me is like true definition of allyship. And like the example for me, I mentioned some insecurities. Well, in one of my previous roles, it was a very obvious career path to a VP position. This VP position involved a lot of road travel, visiting our partners. So I just assumed I couldn't do it because I can't drive. And I remember meeting with at the time who the VP was, and he asked me, like, are you interested in this career path? And I said, well, I don't think I can do it. I can't get out on the road. And his response was like, that's up to us to work with you on finding solutions. It's not just on your shoulders. And so like Kathleen said, it's great to do research and know what you have available to you. And you should definitely participate in finding solutions. But I think truly allyship is also participating in finding solutions. And it sounds like there's a lot of that happening in the various workplaces we represent. So that's really awesome to hear.
I love that example too. And I think that's exactly how companies and how leaders should be responding. You know, it's the company's job to remove those barriers so that everyone has the same opportunity to be able to participate and you know, whether that's applying for roles or being involved with different committees or employee resource groups, whatever it is. You know, so for everyone who's listening on the call today, I hope that's, you know, encouraging to you. And maybe kind of just to wrap up our broad panel discussion today, we'll go around and see if anyone has any kind of advice on whether it's disclosing your disability or offering advice to allies on, you know, things that they can do. Maybe it's sharing a story of something that someone's done for you in the past that you thought was a great demonstration of allyship. But maybe we'll just go around and see if anyone has anything that they want to add as we sort of wrap things up here. So Kathleen, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, so I in my message when I talk to people about disabilities, it's really comes from three things that I'm sort of learning or unlearning as I sort of still am navigating this world, because I didn't always, like Ryan, I didn't always identify with having a disability. So when I was growing up, it was very much like I would jump through all the hoops to make things so much easier for everybody else so that they didn't have to accommodate me. So I've sort of been unlearning that through the years. So a couple of things are, disability is often associated with resilience or overcoming your disability, which isn't something that a lot of us feel comfortable with because we're not really overcoming. We're, learning to live in the world as it is presented to us. So part of the job of allies is to sort of look at the world and see the barriers and start to kind of, remove those barriers, like you were talking about at the beginning with the societal model of disability. So that was one thing. The other thing that I've learned through the years is, a lot of people with disabilities are seen as inspirational because of the things that they are able to accomplish. And, I've been on the cover of newspapers and in news stories and things like that. And it didn't always sit well with me. And I struggled with that growing up. And I couldn't put my finger on it for the longest time. And really what it came down to was that seeing somebody as inspirational because of their disability often comes from a place of fear that if you were ever put in that place that you wouldn't be able to accomplish the same thing. And really that's not true, because we see it time and time again when people acquire disabilities through their life, they're just able to kind of move on and do the same things or learn to do the same things as they always have done. But then the last thing as well is that really everybody is worthy, right? All of our bodies are worthy just as they show up and as they are. So we're worthy as the same, to have the same opportunities as everybody else in life. And that's what this discussion is all about, is about providing opportunities. So I think that, the more we talk about it, the more we see in the media, the more representation and all of these things, like we're going to get there. We are going to make small but meaningful changes every single day that are going to allow people to have the same opportunities as everybody else. So, yeah.
Wow, phenomenal answer. I can see Beverly in the chat just said, well said. And I completely agree. I love that answer. And I really loved what you opened with around how you used to try and just accommodate everyone else, and you're unlearning that, because I think a lot of people probably have done that, people with disabilities, and that's not how the world should be, right? We shouldn't have to shrink ourselves to fit into like a model or a norm that everyone else has just gone along with. So I think that's excellent advice, and you give a lot of other great suggestions too. So thank you so much, Kathleen. Ryan, let's go over to you. Any kind of closing comments you want to share, advice to people about disclosing disability, or advice for allies who want to help make a more inclusive and accessible workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think I said it once before already, but be yourself. Be open, be honest, because if people can't educate other people, this world will slowly go backwards. And I think, as Kathleen said, it is moving forwards. and very slowly, but it is. And for me, I've never tried to unlearn anything. I've never tried to be a hindrance to myself or to anybody else, because I will try to do whatever I can to do what I want to do. If I need help, I will ask. And I think that's the biggest thing, is ask if you need help. Don't think that you can't, because everybody in this world needs help at some point or another. And that's really where I'll leave it on that one. I mean, we live in a world that everybody needs help at some point, so just ask.
Love that. Great advice. Renee, any thoughts you want to add to this?
If anybody, just be genuine and be available. If someone's doing this, they just need your time.
Love it. And Alyson, to close us out, what would you want to say?
I guess I would just say, everyone is worthy of the opportunity to participate fully as themselves at their workplace. So you have the right to ask for that support when needed, but to be an ally and provide that support, don't put it all on the person that's living with a disability to find the solution. Educate yourself and be part of creating the solution.
I love that. What a great place to close out our panel discussion for today. Carolyn, I'll transfer things over to you now to set us up for our breakout rooms.
Well, thank you so much to everyone, and thank you to Lindsay. That was really amazing. And just when we were wrapping up, I couldn't help but think of the job market today. So we're all hearing how it's a job seekers market, and I think just hearing from all of you how wonderful your employers have been, it's very inspiring to see that, from an employer perspective, you really have an opportunity to have your talent say, wow, my employer cares about me so much. They want me to be here. They're going to go the extra mile and research some of these different accommodations. So definitely a lot of opportunities for employers to really be treating their team very well. And that gets around. You'll hear about it from friends and family, and on campus, students always talk about that.